Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland. Behind me is the John F. Kennedy Memorial. So I'm on the only part of the United States which is entirely surrounded by the United Kingdom. So only 2 weeks after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, the British Parliament voted that it would create a memorial to the late American president, and indeed that was done. It was completed 2 years later. And a small parcel of land here, perhaps an acre in size, was donated to the United States. But I had no trouble with passport control, and I didn't have to send 45 pieces of information to myself before even embarking on this journey, nor did Homeland Security take me aside to ask me anything. So here we are right beside Runnymede, where Magna Carta was signed. We're just up the hill from there, hence I'm breathing a bit heavily. And so this is the British Memorial to John F. Kennedy. So John F. Kennedy was born on the 29th of May 1917 in Boston, Massachusetts. His great-grandparents had moved from Ireland to the United States, or put another way, from the United Kingdom, the United States, because the whole of Ireland, we were part of the UK at the time. I think they came from Waterford. There's a John F. Kennedy Memorial Park in Waterford, and he supposedly liked that rebel ballad, "We are the boys of Wexford, who fought with heart and hand to burst and twain the galling chain and free our native land." Anyhow, so this acre of this land is donated to the United States, and he went to Boston Latin School like his father before him. His father, Joseph Kennedy Sr., had prospered in construction, banking, and apparently in bootlegging too, and had lots of licenses to sell medical alcohol, an exemption granted under the Volstead Act. But he saw that the repeal of prohibition was coming as state after state passed the amendment to the Constitution necessary to do away with prohibition as a federal law. It could still be a state law, and it had been a state law in certain states, particularly in the Bible Belt, for decades before it was a federal law. And so he was able to import way more alcohol than he needed. And then once the act was gone, he could sell it legally to anybody. So he did. So they were a wealthy family. And then John F. Kennedy went up to Harvard University. So he was the second son. There were about a dozen children in the family. His mother was a very long-suffering and exceptionally religiously zealous woman, and his father was a notorious womanizer. So John F. Kennedy, he came to the United Kingdom because his father was then appointed ambassador to the court of St. James, as in the American ambassador, or any ambassador to the UK, is called to the court of St. James, because of course St. James's Palace is the official residence of the British royal family, even though they haven't actually lived there for centuries. It's just across the road from Buckingham Palace. I filmed on another occasion where they used to live. It's nowhere near the current US ambassador's residence, and the US embassy at that time is not the current site. It's not the Grosvenor Square site either. So he wrote Why England Slept about British appeasement. Obviously the UK was less of an appeaser than any other country in the world. Anyway, nonetheless, he studied a bit at the LSE, London School of Economics, under Professor Harold Lasky, a socialist. So then when the United States went to war, he volunteered for the US Navy, and he distinguished himself by getting his boat sunk. But he did manage to get his men to swim to safety. So he's fighting in the Pacific against the Nipponese. And the war ended, and he soon entered the United States Congress. So he was a senator representing Massachusetts. He argued, amongst other causes, for Algerian independence from France. So fairly moderate, just didn't want mass unemployment to be there, wanted to make life better for ordinary people, not terribly ideological. And he married Jacqueline Bouvier when he was well into his 30s. She was considerably younger than him. They produced 3 children, one of whom died in infancy. And he was rather an ill man, despite being quite young. He had some sort of problem with his spine, was on various types of medication. And in 1960, there was a very close fought election between him and Richard Milhous Nixon, the sitting Republican vice president. And famously, there was the very first television debate. Was it a mistake of Nixon to wear a grey suit? He had a bit of 5 o'clock shadow. So television imagery was becoming vital then. And by a whisker, Kennedy won it. But there are people who say that the impersonation was used. There was some electoral fraud which his father managed to leverage in order to help his son win. I'm not sure that's true. All the hope had been on John F. Kennedy's elder brother, Joseph Kennedy Jr., who was killed in the Second World War. There was a sort of flying bomb that was going to be aimed at Germany, but it's not like a drone. It had to be taken off. A pilot had to actually take off and then aim it and then bail out once it was on its route to enemy territory. But before he could do that, the whole plane exploded over the skies of the United Kingdom and he was vaporized. So it was a very bitter blow to his father, and the ambition was transferred to his son. The Kennedys were Catholics. There was a considerable degree of anti-Catholicism around, particularly the Democratic Party, which had a lot of Ku Klux Klan support in the South, and they were anti-Catholic. And this was an issue for him. Should Hubert Humphrey get the Democratic nomination in 1960? Well, they didn't. And Kennedy had to assure various Protestant ministers that he wouldn't allow the Pope to interfere in an improper manner with his administration of the country. So he was president, a cold warrior, giving aid to Vietnam, well over 10,000 military advisors to South Vietnam and so on. Only 3 months into his presidency, launching the Bay of Pigs fiasco, where he needed to go big or go home. If the United States had invaded properly, they would have won, but he did it in a pussyfooted manner, and they lost. It was very humiliating. We've got to hand it to him. He had the courage to acknowledge, hey, mea culpa. He took responsibility for that one. It's not like Trump, who's a complete coward who tries to put it onto other people. He manned up, but he was then excoriated for being a wimp in the Cold War. And then in November 1963, he saw that Ngo Diem, the dictator of South Vietnam, was not winning, and the Viet Cong were making ground there. So what were they to do? So the CIA became aware that some Vietnamese army officers, they wanted to overthrow the Ngo Diem. The US had first of all warned them against it, but later changed their mind and gave them the green light. Bobby Kennedy, that's John F. Kennedy's younger brother, his attorney general, he also, when he was convinced they would succeed, said, yeah, let's go ahead. Whilst the United States would not overthrow Ngo Diem, they would do nothing to save him. If the Army of the Republic of Vietnam wanted to oust him, the US would not interfere. And so, but they did say one thing, just don't kill him. The Ngo Diem, you can imprison him, you can send him abroad, but you do not kill him. Well, he was overthrown and he was killed. And his brother Ngo Dinh knew as well. So Kennedy felt distraught because Diem had trusted him and now he'd been killed. But once you give the go-ahead to a putsch, even a sort of passive assent, well, these people can easily get killed. Because whilst he's alive, the Ngo Diem could have still been a threat to the military dictatorship. He could have tried to come back, he could have gone abroad and said embarrassing things. Anyway, so that was the end of him. So John F. Kennedy was toying with three options on Vietnam. He could continue as the United States was, semi-committed. Well, that was going nowhere. They could withdraw totally, or they could commit totally. He hadn't made his mind up till he decided to put the sunroof down in a certain drive-through, a Texan city, and the rest is history. So that's John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and there's a quotation here from his inaugural address on the 20th of January 1963, and indeed I met the man who wrote it when I was very little. I met Ted Sorensen, in all places, of Egypt, aboard a cruise ship down the Nile. I was 7, and I had no idea how crucial this man was in world history, but my father was deeply impressed to have met him. But anyway, let every nation know, whether they wish us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friendship, or oppose any foe, in order to assure the survival and success of liberty. Well, fine words. Almost adrenaline in print, or verbal adrenaline perhaps, but was the United States really willing to pay any price? Because obviously in Vietnam the suffering was just too great, and indeed was that liberty that it was upholding, because it wasn't a really free country, certainly wasn't a democratic country under the South Vietnamese dictatorship. I know the North Vietnamese regime was even worse, but the United States could not in all honesty say this was about democracy. It was about capitalism, I grant you, somewhat open society. Anyway, that's enough from the John F. Kennedy Memorial here in the UK, the slab of Portland stone. There's a hawthorn bush hard by, supposedly an allusion to his Roman Catholicism. I'm not quite sure what that's got to do with Catholicism. This was damaged by a small bomb in 1967 by people protesting against American military involvement in Vietnam. So I urgently need donations to sustain this channel. So please donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Callahan is spelled C-A-L-L-A-G-H-A-N. That's all small letters. Right, toodaloo.